Welcome to our little vibe coding session with Jazz. Just again, the structure of it is going to be, I'll give you an intro, we'll look very hands-on how to build a simple app with Jazz and then add some features to it that are kind of typical that you might want in your app. And we'll do that without any AI help. We'll do that by hand, just so you see exactly how it's done. Then I'll show you some quick examples of what other people are building with Jazz in terms of more ambitious apps and give you a couple pointers how you can use AI tools to help you build Jazz apps. And then the idea is, so that's going to be about like 20-ish minutes. And then the whole rest of the session you can use to build your first Jazz app. And it can be whatever you want. We are lucky to now have a bunch of people in our team. So you just start building your thing. We'll come around. You let us know if you have any questions. And hopefully by the end of it, we'll have a bunch of cool apps. And like, if you take part in this today, you can become a certified vibe coder. I'll tell you more about that in the end, but it's worth it basically. So I'm Anselm, by the way. I'm the founder of Garden Computing. We're building Jazz, which is a local first framework. Usually our target audience is way more mainstream front-end devs who've never heard of local first. So in a lot of our marketing, we don't really mention what local first is or why you should care. We just kind of tell you the benefits. But today I'll go into a bit more detail, and then tomorrow I have a talk as well where I really go in depth about what we did over the last year, what we think local first is, why it's relevant now with AI. For today, you'll just get a feeling of what is it actually like to use Jazz. And this is a vibe coding session. Vibe coding is obviously a new term, but I thought about it and I realized I feel like I've been vibe coding since I was like 12 or 13. And to me, it's all about this excitement of like, let's build an app and let's just get going and get into this flow state. And the problem is these days, if you try to build an app, you're immediately confronted traditionally with all of these choices and things you need to think about. Integrations you need to do, and kind of what got me into local first in the first place, and what the promise for me really is that it's actually a new kind of architecture that lets us get rid of most of that stuff, and that's kind of what Jazz is all about for me. And the clearest way I can explain this is like what you actually do with traditional tech stacks. If you think about like every stack that you've built for every app that you've ever built, all that the backend and the database and all the other things you need really do is just reinvent how shared state works. So to explain what Jazz is really about, I want you to think again about how every stack that you've ever built for every app that you've ever built was really just about making it possible to share state between users and devices. And we're doing that kind of very by hand, and we need to integrate lots of systems to make that possible. And for Jazz, what Jazz is to me is an answer to the question, what if we just started from shared state? What if that was the abstraction we could build our apps around? And then what kind of infrastructure do we need for that? And it turns out you can actually really generalize that. We call it sync and storage. And you can take this infrastructure and the client-side abstractions kind of for granted and build around that. That's the idea. You'll see in a second what I mean by that. And to really like prime yourselves for this experience, I don't know, like who of you would say you're a front-end developer, for example? What about like more like completely back-end? Full stack? Cool, yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting. To all of you, completely forget everything you've learned. Forget what you identify as. It's like, it's tricky for us. That's our biggest challenge when explaining Jazz. Everyone has these preconceived notions. Think back to the first HTML page that you built, where you made a new file, put something in it, and you could open it in your browser and it rendered it, and that's like magical. That to me is vibe coding. If you think about something like React, it's actually not too much of a step from that, right? You still have kind of the same output format. It looks like HTML, but now you've got this like really interesting way to add reactivity and interactivity to it, where you have the idea of local state, classically use state. You can update it and the whole thing re-renders. You don't have to think about how exactly you need to like manipulate the DOM to make the thing re-render when something happens. You can think on a very high level. But then again, the next step from that to a fully working app, now you suddenly need to think about backends, shuffling data back and forth, doing requests, all the different systems in which the state lives. And Jazz is like, what if that wasn't reality? What if we could just go from this step and do one more very simple step, which is instead of use state, you have use co-state for collaborative state. And that's exactly this like infrastructure and shared state as an abstraction that you can take for granted. So the Jazz equivalent to like my first little app would look something like this. You define a schema. To anyone who's used Zod before, that should look pretty familiar. And then instead of use state, we just use co-state. Tell it the schema of the collaborative state we'd like to work around. And then, for example, this component gets an ID for one instance of this counter. And here counter is now a reactive state that works just like use state. And we can render something based on it. And we can, for example, in a button on click handler, modify the state. And what happens is that just like with normal local use state, your component will re-render. But this is where the magic comes in, and the reactivity extends from just one device and one user to everyone. If you shared that counter ID with someone else and they loaded your app and that same component, they would instantly see when you update that counter on their device. And that's kind of all you need to know almost already. There's one more thing that comes in, which is how does auth and permissions work. We'll see that in our hands-on example, but that's really the whole story. And I want you to just mentally compare the complexity of the stacks that you usually build to something that's actually much closer to like just thinking about the UX and the things that really matter about your app and being able to express that and have that work directly. Are you ready to build a simple chat app? Like I said, we'll do this very manually. I've got kind of a base started here. I'll just get that going. Where am I? Why don't I have a package JSON?
I think you need to go into chat.
Yes.
Because you are in chat stages.
So you are paying attention, that's perfect. So let's open this up, let's say in Chrome, and I have to be careful not to spoil any of my other demos for tomorrow. Pretend you didn't see that. Okay, we have a very simple chat app here. I just have this button, create chat. I'll just walk you through what it's like to use it. I can press hi. Doesn't even have my name or time or anything on it because we're starting simple. What's the schema for this app? Again, a message is just a collaborative map. That's like an object that has a single primitive property called string. And then a chat is nothing more than a collaborative list of messages. Makes sense, right? How do we render this? Let's have a look at how our app is set up here. We have this top-level app.js. We have little like hash-based routing here, just again for the homepage. And then if you look at the particular chat, so something that's interesting is maybe to start looking at what happens when we click this create chat button. You can see we just render a button, and in the onClick handler, we create something called a group. We can get more into that later, but basically that sets up permissions. And then we can just use our objects from the schema, like a chat, and say we'd like to create a chat that's an empty list of messages, and then just navigate to that ID, right? So if we go to that ID, what do we see? This is this chat screen. It just gets the ID as a parameter. And then we see, again, use co-state. We say we'd like to load a chat with this ID. And then we have this little thing that looks a little bit like a query here, where we just say, like, OK, please also load all of the messages. And that's all I need to do. And now this, if you look at the type, it's a bit convoluted, but it's basically just an array of messages. And I can just render that directly in here. You can see I kind of like map over it, reverse in time, and render this chat bubble. And that's what we see happens. Again, if we look at the text input at the bottom, all that does like this just reads like something that you would have mocked up around local JavaScript objects. You just push a new message to the chat. You make sure it belongs to the same owner as the chat, and that's all you need to do. You can literally create objects in your button on click handlers. And that's what happens when I type something here. Does that make sense so far? So let's see, what else can we look at? Yeah, it would be nice before we start adding any features to take a bit of a look under the hood of what's going on in Jazz. And for that, we have something really fun called the Jazz Inspector. So if we go to our top level of the app here, you see we don't really need to set up much. We just add this Jazz provider, which connects the app to our infrastructure and does all the syncing. Again, you see like nothing app specific. Our infrastructure doesn't even need to know our schema or anything. It just abstractly syncs data for us. But to see what's happening under the hood, we can just add the inspector here. And then we have this little Jazz icon. And we can click on that and, for example, give it the ID of our chat. And then we see like, oh, look, this is a co-list and it has the messages in it. We can look at this one. We can see, oh, that's owned by some group. And I'll show you that in more detail later, but basically this lets you look at the underlying Jazz state that exists on your device, on the cloud, and on other devices. Right now, there's not much going on. I'd say let's start adding some typical features to it that you would expect from a Jazz app. For example, we would like to know when each message was posted, right? Again, in the current world, in your traditional stack, you would be like, oh, probably I need to add like a created at column to my database and make sure I remember to like set that every time I create a message. But Jazz takes the approach that since you're building something where people collaborate, when stuff happens is actually important. History is important. So what Jazz does is it doesn't just implement shared state, it implements the full edit history of everything that you've ever created. And you get all kinds of useful metadata like when was it created, who created this object for free, and it's a high level thing that's built into Jazz. So even with this existing data that I have here, we can just start building this feature to show the time. So if I go to my UI components into the chat bubble, which is here actually, I can just, you can see here I get the message passed, and so far I'm just extracting the text from it. But I can now say like, okay, let's get the last edit of the text property on that message. And then we can, for example, render the timestamp of when that happened. And if we go back to our app, oh, I should put it out here. Now we have the timestamp when everything was created. Obviously, we also want to know like one of the most typical features of a chat app is like, was this message by me or some other person? Maybe we want to put it on one side or the other side, use different colors. So what we can do here is we can see if the last edit was done by me. And again, me is like a built-in abstraction into Jazz. The current user is very meaningful. And we can just start using that in our UI, in this case, just to apply some different class names. You can see this is now by me, and this is probably a good time for me to start sharing the app with you so you can see our multiplayer interactivity in the shared state. Now, I don't know what you guys like to use for hosting your apps, maybe like Vercel or something like that. What I like doing is just opening like a tunnel here. Let's see if that works. Okay, let's just forward the port. What are we on here? 5173. We'll create a new port forward. Make it public for all of you. Yep, I know what I'm doing. And then instead of going to localhost, we go to this URL, and I'll open it up here for you as a I'll create a new chat. I'm like, hey everyone. And then you can use this QR code to join, and you should be able to chat with me. And this is just to show like I didn't have to like deploy any backend or anything. This is literally like the most primitive way of sharing like the dev server of my frontend with you guys. And because all this infrastructure just exists and is abstracted away for you, you have this like childlike early HTML experience of building something that does something interesting on your computer, but it's all automatically shared, and multiplayer is just like a given. Does that make sense? Cool, seems to be working. Should we add some more fun stuff to the app while we're all using it? Yeah, we should see all of your names. So let's add to our bubble also, like, we can do something like last added by profile name. But it's kind of disappointing because it just says anonymous user for everyone, right? So this leads me to the next topic, which is how are accounts and profiles expressed in Jazz? And the fun thing is that actually your user account is itself just a co-value. So what we can do to kind of make that a bit more explicit in our schema is we add one more item to our schema, which we call the chat account. We don't worry about the root right now, but we have this public profile, which has a name property in it. And this actually just mirrors what's baked into Jazz by default. I'm just showing it to you here so you can see it. And then we just need to do one thing where at the top of our app, we kind of register that account schema with the Jazz provider. And then, for example, let's do something like this, where here in our app, in kind of the main container, we render a top bar with our profile name. So let's see, does that work? Yeah. I actually cheated in already because I didn't. I still have the local storage from an old version, so let's pretend I don't have that. I joined it again. Yeah, I trust Microsoft. But okay, I'm again just anonymous user. I see people getting creative with the ASCII art. Answering each other's quick questions. Perfect, love it. Okay, so that's still kind of boring. Let's add the ability to change our username. And again, in the past, you would need to do a request to some backend, look up something in the users table, change the name. Here, how about we just replace in our top bar, instead of just rendering the name, we put an input with our name. And in the onChange handler, we literally just overwrite me.profile name. So now I can be like, if I post something, hey again, it's from an anonymous user, but now I can rename myself to Anselm, and it updates in real time, and you should be able to do that as well. I already see the first people adding their usernames. So how else can we use this? Let's skip that. Yeah, for example, like one thing you might have noticed is that you didn't have to log in, and that was really important to us. Jazz actually gives you anonymous accounts by default, so you can invite people and they can just start doing stuff in your app. And as you develop the app, you can kind of add auth methods after the fact, and you can keep that smooth onboarding journey for your users where they can start anonymous and then log in to do certain things, or you could like completely gate it, make them log in immediately. I'd refer you to our docs for all the different auth methods you can use. But for now, we'll just keep these like very easy accounts and add some more features to our app. For example, something else that's usually quite hard to do, but every chat app needs, a lot of other kinds of apps need, are images and files. So how would you do something like that? Again, think in like a normal app, once you start adding file uploads, it gets really complicated. You need to probably put them in some kind of blob storage, and then you need to remember the ID of that thing, put it in your database, fetch it on the client. Uploading itself is really tricky. With Jazz, if we want the ability to add images to our chat messages, all we need to do is just go to the schema and just say like, well, we want an image, and it's like another built-in thing. We need an input for it, so what does that look like? We have our text input here, right? That's pretty boring. For the image input, this is basically just a slightly more comfortable abstraction around a file input in the browser. Just gives us the browser file and the callback. So for nothing jazzy, that's just like UI abstractions. And then we can go to our input bar. And here where we use it in chat screen, you see we have the text input, we just add the image input. So if we look at the app now, that probably So now we can open like the file picker, but it doesn't do anything yet, right? So we just need a little callback. And this is where the magic really happens. We just get the file. This is like a browser like built-in file thing that we get from the file picker. We'll not put size limits for now. We don't need that. And then it's a single call to something called create image. Again, we just need to set the permissions, saying that everyone who can read the chat should also be able to look at this image. And then once we have it, well, we just push a new message with that image on it. And you can manipulate images and binary data just like structured data. You have it all in one place. You didn't need to add any extra systems. We just need one more thing, which is like, obviously, we want to render the image. So we'll add this component called bubble image, which uses a helper called progressive image, because what Jazz does under the hood is when you create the image, it actually scales it into multiple resolutions. And then progressive image, based on this like image definition co-value, lazily loads it, so you get these like really fast, low resolution image previews. One thing that's really important for us with Jazz is like, it's local first, it works offline, but it also works well over like sketchy connections. And images and binary files are like a good example of where we just really wanted to have batteries included to give people a really good user experience for something like that. I'll show you in a second what it looks like. So all we need to do now in Chat Bubble is just get the image out of here. And then if we have one, render that here. And let's give this a try. Did that work? Yeah, I don't know if I refreshed it properly. What am I missing? Did I not save anything? Oh, I didn't connect the... I did not connect the thing to the send image, I think. So in the image input, which we use here, we need to connect that to send image. And then make sure we've got the newest version. Perfect, there we go. You should be able to post images. Isn't it refreshing if your problem isn't like, oh, what went wrong between these like 10 systems? Like, no, I just forgot to put the button on click handler, right? There we go. That's already much better. Cool. The final thing I'll show you here, because it's really important for when your app gets more serious. Like, so far what we have here is really easy shared state. It kind of relies on this ID being in the URL as like a shareable thing for other people to discover that same co-value of the chat and the nested ones that you're trying to load. But in a lot of apps, you have typically like a bunch of objects that a user cares about, like my projects or something like that. And again, in a traditional world with databases, you would have a table where you associate that with each user. The approach that Jazz takes is kind of a little bit inspired by GraphQL, where I don't know who's familiar with it, but there you have the idea of these like top-level root objects that you can then query into. And what Jazz has, and what we saw a little bit here in the schema already, is that for your user account, you have what's called a root and a profile. And these are basically your two top-level entry points from which you can get co-values associated with the current user. The difference is just that stuff in profile is typically public to all other users, and stuff you put in root is private data that only the user really cares about or can see. So one simple and final thing that we can do with our chat app here is let's do the ability to create multiple chats and kind of remember them and go back to them. So you as a user can have multiple chats that you care about. So what we'll do is we just start putting stuff into our root co-map here, and we can say, for example, yeah, I want to have something like my chats, which is a list of chats. Simple enough. And then let me actually extract that into a separate thing, because it will make it a bit easier to use elsewhere. So this is just an alias, right? We have our account root now. And then in the home screen, for example, if I go back to the beginning of the app, here we just have the create chat button. it would be nice to have a list of our chats here, so why don't we do something like this, where instead of just resolving the profile, or here in the home screen, where we can use the same thing that we used here, use account, here we resolve the profile. Well, here we want to resolve this property called my chats out of the root. Can you kind of see how that corresponds to the schema? And then for the UI of it, we can really just map over my chats if we have them. And then what we need to make sure of is we still don't see anything. Well, because we don't have any saved chats. We just need to do two more things, which is since we kind of changed our schema in a way that's attached to our account, like we didn't used to have this my chats property, we actually need to do something called a migration. And it's very similar to a database migration. When you change your schema, you put a migration on your account, and that migration will be run every time your app refreshes. And that's how you can add stuff to your schema. So in our case, since we didn't even have a root before, we just like, well, if we don't have a root, we create one and we make sure we just create an empty list of chats that we can then start populating. Does that make sense so far? Last thing we need to do is when we create a new chat now, we literally just push it to my list of chats. So if I create a new chat now, I have this chat. Hey, I can go back. It's just called chat 0. Obviously, you could then go in and grab like the title that it has or something like this. But this is very simply the ability to attach stuff to your account and really start building a full app where people have persistent state. If I was able to log into that same account on a different device, I would see these exact same two chats. That's pretty much my walkthrough. Any questions before I go back to some final slides? Obviously, if you run into things that weren't quite clear while you're building your apps, let us know. It's actually really important feedback for us, like what's intuitive and what isn't, so don't be shy with that. But yeah, I hope this gave you a pretty good idea of how quickly you can build something interactive that's multi-user with persistent data, persistent accounts. Maybe one thing to mention is that whenever you create things here, they are first created locally. So you could switch off your Wi-Fi, push some messages, turn the Wi-Fi back on, it gets synced everywhere else. And it's all synchronous, it exists immediately locally. And that's like a very easy thing to work with. You don't have to worry about the eventual consistency of it at all. To give you an idea of what some people are building that's more ambitious and really to show that you can build full apps with that, one of my favorite examples is Invoice Radar. It's an app where it's an Electron app that you run locally, and it kind of logs into your various cloud providers and pulls invoices, which you can then easily submit to tax authorities. And it sounds a bit sketchy because you have to give it access to your like login credentials for these providers. But the reason that's totally fine and why it's kind of an app that you can only build with Jazz is because everything that I've shown you, like creating the chat, sharing it with other people, the whole system around invitations and permissions that I haven't even shown you, is all based on what I call local first permissions, which means that there's not some central authority that controls who can see content. It's based on public key cryptography. So you create, for example, a chat. You have the encryption keys for it, and only if you give someone else the same keys can they look at it. And all the stuff that's happening in the chat gets synced through our infrastructure without the infrastructure ever seeing anything in plain text. So because the permissions also are implemented and enforced fully on the client, you actually don't need to trust us as all with whatever is happening in your app, and you get these really high-level abstractions for just inviting people as a reader or a writer. And that's what the folks from Invoice Radar used. Like, this is a fully local app, but they're working on like a companion app for your phone where you also have all your invoices and you get that cross-device sync, but it's fully end-to-end encrypted and secure. Another really cool app is called Hand. It's for language learning. And it's also local first, but has very nice AI integrations where you're like, hey, I want to learn French, for example, give me like a medium difficulty text. It comes up with a story. And then you can go ahead and kind of, you basically just read interesting texts, and for each word you say whether this is a new word or one that you've never seen before or one that you kind of know, and it kind of adapts as you go with the difficulties of your text. And that's, again, all stored locally, but also synced. You can kind of start doing a text. You go out to go somewhere, continue learning from the same text on your phone. You can import podcasts and YouTube videos that you like and learn your language that you're currently learning based on these. And this is done by a single developer to like a really high degree of polish, and he was able to build this app quickly because he didn't have to worry about any infrastructure at all, basically. Oh, didn't realize this actually read it out as well. Now to the fun bit. If you want to get started building an app, just starting from a blank state, the easiest thing to do is npx create jazz app. It will ask you a couple questions about which frameworks you want to use. And most importantly, getting back to the vibe coding part, it also has cursor rules already built in. If you want to use something like V0 or other vibe coding tools, on our homepage, we have this section called AI tools. So if you go to our docs, go to AI tools, you have an LLM text that you can use. And even though Jazz is like very alien and weird and different from traditional infrastructure, they should do a pretty good job helping you build your Jazz app. Again, it's a thing where we would really appreciate your feedback. One other thing you can try to do is, whatever you think of building, you can look at our example apps and see if you find something similar and then use that as a template. For example, if you want to do like something with collaborative rich text, which we also have nice integrations for, you can just use that as a template, kind of get this customized create Jazz app prompt, and again, AI will do a bit of a better job of basing your customization or your new app on top of that. I briefly mentioned it in the beginning. It's worth doing so because if you successfully build a cool app today, you can be the first to participate in our Vibe Coder certification program, because with AI tools and Jazz, it's actually incredibly easy to build apps. The problem with that is like, well, now anyone can kind of be a developer, and that sucks because like how do we gatekeep them? So for that reason, we thought as an infrastructure vendor, we can only really certify stuff built with our own framework. So it's exclusive to Jazz apps. But if you build something cool with Jazz app, you can get certified. You get one of these cool stickers, and you can pop by our booth tomorrow and the day after, show us your app, and you will not only get the sticker, but also your own personalized certificate, which you can then put on your LinkedIn or whatever people do with these things. Thank you very much. I hope that was fun. Take some time to think what you want to build. Maybe you want to build stuff with people around you together. If you have questions, look out for me, other people in Jazz t-shirts, or anyone who looks helpful, because we have a couple of existing Jazz users as well who are very good at it by now. Thank you very much.